You could call this morning's guest Your Honor, Colonel, Professor, Chief Judge, philanthropist, entrepreneur, so many others. I'm just going to call him Dad. Meet Robinson Everett, coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at East of Chicago Pizza here at 40th Avenue North and Kings Highway in Myrtle Beach. We're focused on part 2 of Robinson Oscar Everett. Good morning, my father. That's right, my father. How about this amazing, for folks who weren't with us yesterday, to get a sense of East of Chicago Pizza. This place is games, fun for everyone.
Oh, these pizzas are going to be great to eat today.
I know. We're going to have to stay around for lunch. And, of course, I hope you'll be willing to come back with us tomorrow as well, Dad. We've got a three-peat of Robinson Oscar Everett. Of course, yesterday you were sharing with us as we wrapped up a couple of amazing instances of your father and taking on pretty difficult cases in the past before his death in 1971. I think you were sharing one with us that was particularly interesting, and unfortunately we ran out of time.
Well, let me ask a couple of things beforehand. First, if I'm here tomorrow, can I get some more pizza here?
Absolutely. With 3 days of pizza. Yesterday's pizza was incredible. Their pizza bar and salad bar are incredible.
Yeah. Then secondly, I couldn't remember the name of the coach at Yale.
Right.
Who was a heavy guy who we challenged to the eating contest.
Yeah.
I think it was Herman Hickman.
Herman Hickman.
I believe.
Herman Hickman. And you said he had formerly been a coach at NC State.
I think he was an assistant coach then.
Right. But, and so you and your law school roommate challenged him. For viewers who weren't with us yesterday, he had supposedly had the claim
could
eat more than any two men, and you and your roommate took him on, and he never showed up.
He never accepted the invitation.
That's right.
We were hoping we'd get a great meal at an elite Boston restaurant, but it didn't happen.
Well, that's okay. You tried, yeah.
But let me go back, sort of finish things off about my dad. He handled some very difficult cases, and I think he was an outstanding trial lawyer. But in addition, as a legislator...
he served in the North Carolina legislature for how long?
5 different terms.
5 terms, wow.
And he showed courage there. The thing that particularly comes to mind concerns the Ku Klux Klan and the anti-masking, anti-hooding law. Sometime back, I guess, in the 1910 to 20 period, along in that general period,
right.
He was in his office, in his law office, and some people came to the office, and the secretary came in and said, "Mr. Everett, there's some people who want to talk to you." So he said, "Send them in." These men come in, they say, "Everett, you're in the General Assembly. We're from the KKK, from the Ku Klux Klan. We understand that the General Assembly is thinking about having an anti-hooding statute, preventing us from wearing masks. And we want you to know, if you support that, your political career is at an end. You're in the General Assembly now. You won't be after that." And my father, as he recited it to me, was very offended. And he said, "You're nothing but a bunch of thugs coming here telling me this." So I never heard of this legislation. But now that you've told me about it, I'm going to get more details and I will introduce it. So that was his approach. If he thought people were pushing things for the wrong reasons or in the wrong direction, he would push back and push back hard. So he was a wonderful example, and
that's great.
I guess he inspired me to take some cases that were unpopular, like one I took to the Supreme Court.
I remember, and when the News and Observer did a big piece about you back in the mid-'90s, highlighting your goal, albeit it's potentially a very tough goal, but your goal of a colorblind society. And they did a big write-up on you as the Tar Heel of the Week, which is great. As you know, the Herald does a lot of weekly profiles and profiles of people we could probably do one like that, but the News and Observer there in Raleigh does their Tar Heel of the Week. And I remember when you got it one year, and of course they had the Chancellor at North Carolina Central University, Julius Chambers, speaking about you, highlighting that your goal is a potentially very important one, but his perception was that would be a difficult one to achieve, and the way you taken it on in fighting against racial gerrymandering was one that he did not agree with.
No, he did not agree with it.
He did not agree with it. You know, I saw an award you'd gotten back in 2004 from the North Carolina Bar Association, the Judge John J. Parker Award, and it was amazing as Norfleet Jones, I believe, or Norfleet, somebody was reading out your amazing accomplishments, but he highlighted that in an earlier year, one of the more exciting meetings at the North Carolina Bar Association was when you and former Chancellor Chambers, who'd also received the Judge Parker Award in years prior, had debated each other as to the merits of racial gerrymandering in North Carolina and nationwide. And of course, I think he also took you on in the U.S. Supreme Court. Chancellor Chambers, Julius Chambers there, as he argued on behalf of the NAACP supporting racial gerrymandering. Of course, again, I think you all had known each other for a long time. It was amazing hearing him talk about a colorblind society and his views, the practical side potentially, and your views as a pursuit for a colorblind society. What prompted that, Dad? Was it your parents?
Well, I think it dated back to 1966, when I'd been involved in some redistricting litigation in the North Carolina, in the federal courts in North Carolina. This was because of a gerrymander that was designed to assure the election or the retention in office of particular members of Congress, actually a particular member. And I thought that was the wrong thing, and I helped a potential candidate who was being gerrymandered out. I helped him by starting a lawsuit attacking that system. And although we didn't win, we did at least get a decision where they were going to change the redistricting in the future, and there were references to compactness and contiguousness as important criteria. So in 1992, right after my mother died, I became aware of the tremendous gerrymander, the racial gerrymander, that had been undertaken by the North Carolina General Assembly. And when I saw the map of what had been done, I thought, this just isn't right. You're not supposed to create districts to elect either a particular person, as had been done in 1966, pardon me, and you're not supposed to gerrymander racially to assure the election of a person of a particular race. So I thought somebody ought to do something about it. And then I encountered a close friend of mine who had been one of the plaintiffs back in 1966. Yeah. Her name was Ruth Shaw.
Right.
Wonderful person, a widow who lost her husband in a tragic accident.
Oh, yeah.
I knew her very well. And we were talking very briefly right after my mother died. It was
I remember. I think at
the wake.
At the wake, right.
And I'm shaking hands with people as they go through the line. And we had a little conversation. Ruth said something like, they're doing this all over again. And I said, yeah, it's very, very bad. Somebody ought to do something about it. And then one of the other, either she or I, said, well, we'll do something about it. Mm-hmm. And so a few days later, we started a lawsuit where I was one of the plaintiffs. Ruth was the lead plaintiff.
Right.
One of my close colleagues at Duke, Mel Shim, who's now deceased, who believed in that concept of avoiding race consciousness, having one society. Mel was a plaintiff, And then, as a matter of fact, my son, Greg Everett, namely you,
Right.
were a plaintiff.
And Dorothy Bullock.
My secretary, who worked night and day to get the papers ready,
Right.
she thought, she was a Durham native, she thought it was wrong. And so she decided she would join with us. So the five of us, I won't say the fabulous five, but the five of us went all the way to the Supreme Court. And when we started up there, after losing 2-1 in a federal district court.
There in North Carolina,
in
right?
North Carolina, right. When we started there, I think most people thought we had the chance of a snowball you-know-where. And then the Supreme Court announced that it was going to grant review, and there were filed all sorts of briefs, so-called amici briefs.
Right.
The Republican Party, interestingly enough, came in as an intervener on our side.
Right.
The ACLU on the other side, the American Jewish Congress on our side, as I recall. Anyway, the Democratic Party on the other side, which was a little hard for me to get used to because I've been a traditional Democrat. My mother and dad were traditional Democrats.
Right.
And that they would be fighting our position on this issue was just heartrending for me. Mm-hmm. But it was a great experience. So I've tried to follow the example of my mother and dad, particularly my dad, by taking cases that might be unpopular, but where you try to do the right thing. And people deserve counsel. I've tried to help with programs to provide legal assistance to underdogs of various types.
What was the name, the South Carolinian who had worked for President Bush at the time in the Justice Department, who was in charge of this push to essentially, and it's a terrible thing, but to... and I remember it, what he called it, which is a term I can't use on commercial television, but he worked in the Bush Justice Department, and he wanted, unfortunately in this instance, to pack folks of a certain color so that he would bleach the other districts to benefit Republicans, and it did. It obviously helped dramatically when they took over Congress in '94 because he had bleached the other districts. They had a dramatic shift in North Carolina where there had been 8 Democrats and 3 Republicans to becoming 8 Republicans and 4 Democrats because of Eva Clayton and Mel Watt's 2 districts had taken, unfortunately, all the persons out of spreading them around the state properly, compactly, and instead taking 160-mile-long district. So it was a Republican push there by President Bush at that time's, what was the name of the guy from South Carolina?
I don't recall.
Can't remember, who spearheaded that to bleach all the districts to give them to Republicans, essentially.
Well, the summary was pack blacks, bleach whites. And that had some dramatic political consequences, but it was basically wrong. And the interesting thing is there apparently had been a change in the Republican...
Lee Atwater.
What?
Was it Lee Atwater?
That's right.
Lee Atwater.
Lee Atwater was involved.
Was the Palmetto State guy who worked for the Bush Justice Department to pack those districts or to bleach the other.
Yeah, and there was a change in philosophy, and as of 1993-94, when, of course, the Clinton administration had taken over, it's ironic, the Republican Party was on our side.
I know.
And the Democratic Party was filing briefs on the other side. So things take a strange turn sometimes. But it was interesting, and I think we did the right thing. So, and we were up at the Supreme Court 4 times.
Amazing. In the U.S. Supreme Court, of course, they hear they actually have oral argument less than 100 times a year. They only hear 70, 80, maybe 90 cases a year. And to think over less than a 10-year period, over a 7-year period, you were there 4 separate times arguing on behalf of the plaintiffs. Of course, it changed a lot over time. I was dropped as a plaintiff, Mel and Ruth. I guess Ruth was able to stay in. You were dropped as a plaintiff, but you were representing Ruth and Mel, who actually lived in the 12th District, I believe. So things changed, but the spirit was the same.
Yeah, it kept going, and there were 4 different appeals involved, and in one way or the other. And unfortunately, ultimately, the Supreme Court, while vindicating the principle there should be no racial gerrymandering, where the purpose is predominantly racial, left open a means of evasion where the politician can say, we didn't do this for racial reasons,
right.
We did it for political reasons.
Right.
And even though it's sort of a subterfuge, and that's the frightening thing, that the system can still be manipulated for the wrong purpose. And I think it's so important that the legislature of a state look at some fundamental concepts like compactness, contiguousness, community of interest, and not draw dividing lines which are bizarre.
And also, at some level, following TV and radio markets oftentimes. It's very difficult for someone to run. You know, there was that 12th district that ran from Durham through the Greensboro down into the Charlotte TV markets, potentially even into the Asheville, Greenville, Spartanburg market, into 4 TV markets. For someone to run for office,
sure,
they'd have to spend so much money to campaign. It makes it very difficult. Not to stay on that for long. Of course, you know, we think about, we were at 1950 yesterday, talking about your first year of teaching there at Duke Law School. Then you joined, and I want to mention, our director pointed out that it's important for aspiring lawyers or for law students to take the time. They can go online to Oyez, OYEZ.org, to listen to oral arguments. They can listen to you. I think recently, not long ago, you listened to yourself, actually, as you did the oral argument in April 20th of 1993. For the opinion that was handed down June of 1993, that same year. I remember I was taking a summer school class at UNC Chapel Hill and was able to read about it in the Daily Tar Heel there, how exciting it was in one of the libraries over there. But it was fascinating. I want to encourage folks to go to Oyez or to go to a search engine, Google, for instance. Google your name, Robinson Everett, and they'll see one of the first 10 links is a link to your oral argument there in the U.S. Supreme Court, as well as to the other 3 times you argued cases and hearing other cases. They can go back and hear Brown v. Board of Education back in '54, or they could hear other fascinating cases over the last 50 years where they've preserved the oral argument by tape.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
Is that access to history?
Absolutely. Well, let's go back, if you don't mind, 55 plus years, Dad, to you taught law at Duke for a year,
right,
but then you joined the Air Force. Is that right? As a military lawyer?
You know, it's ironic. The day I graduated from law school, North Koreans came over into South Korea. So I, not having been in World War II, I had a reasonable expectation I would be in the military. And then on the second day of the 3-day bar exam, I went ahead and enlisted in the Air Force Reserve, and then soon after applied for a JAG commission. And ultimately I was commissioned as a first lieutenant in the Air Force JAG and was ordered on active duty in 1951 in August, and sent down to a base in West Texas.
Right.
And that was a very interesting experience, almost a different culture out on the high plains.
West Texas, yeah.
Out in the Panhandle. So I had 2 years, most of which I spent there. And then by another remarkable happenstance, well, I'll tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes. Share with us.
This is so bizarre. I was getting ready to come back to Durham and practice law. I had something lined up with a law firm. And I came to Durham. Then I thought, well, I'll go up to Washington. I had a ride up there with a friend, and I'll try to get a flight out of one of the air bases near Washington to go back to West Texas.
Right.
And when I got up there, I thought, well, you know, it'd be nice to be a member of the bar of the Court of Military Appeals. That was a court that had been created in 1951 to review convictions by court-martial in serious cases. And so I called out to the Pentagon and asked if they would take me over so I could be sworn in, if they could arrange for that. And they did. They took me over. A colonel took me over. And we go up to the chambers of one of the 3 judges. They were not in session at the time. And this judge, Judge Brosman, swears me in his chambers.
Wow.
And then he says to the colonel who brought me over, says, "Colonel, do you mind if Lieutenant Everett stays with me, talks to me a little while? You can go back to the Pentagon if he's willing to stay." Well, those judges had the rank of a 4-star general. So there was not much question what was going to happen. Obviously, I was very happy to stay around.
Yeah.
So I go into his chambers, and he says, "Lieutenant Everett, I just had a vacancy on my staff. My commissioner just left me, and I need a vacancy filled. You're going to be getting out of the military in about a month. Would you be willing to come to Washington and be my commissioner?"
No.
And I was amazed.
Yeah.
Of course, I then said, "Well, Judge, what is a commissioner?" I didn't know what he meant.
Sure.
And he called in the clerk of court and said to the clerk, "Mr. Prue, would you explain to Lieutenant Everett what a commissioner is?" And the clerk of court, Fred Prue, then said, "Well, it's like a GS-13. It is a GS-13.
Which means what for our viewers?
Well, that's exactly what I said. What is a GS-13? Well, I discovered it was a grade of government employment, but he said it's a grade you'll have, as a government employee.
And you were only 24 or 5 at this point.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little puzzled, and I said, "Well, I just don't know what a GS-13 is. I never thought of working for the government." He said, "Well, it's sort of like being between a major and a lieutenant colonel." And I thought, what a jump promotion. Here I am, a first lieutenant. They're talking about jumping up. So I called back to North Carolina. I asked the firm that I was going to be coming with if they could delay my arrival, etc., and they agreed. And so I wound up accepting the position, spending the next 2 years in Washington.
Is that right? As a commissioner of the Court of Military Appeals.
Right, and it was a great experience.
That's amazing.
I assisted the judge in looking at the record, helping write opinions and so on.
Were they located at that time at 450 E Street Northwest, the same location? Wow.
The same location they are now.
That's amazing.
Except now they have a different name. It's no longer the Court of Military Appeals, for which the acronym used to be COMA.
COMA, yeah.
And now it's Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces.
That's right.
And CAF is a better acronym than COMA.
They just don't promote the acronym anymore. Yeah.
But in any event, it's at right there at the heart of Washington.
Oh, yeah. Magnificent location.
And it had been the courthouse for one of the local courts, the Federal Court of Appeals. And apparently the chief judge of the court knew Harry Truman, and when the court was established, he went over to the president, persuaded him to make that courthouse available.
Yeah.
Great place to be.
It is, 450 E Street Northwest. And of course, the security is a lot heavier now than it was when you joined. We'll get to that probably tomorrow, Dad. We're about to run out of time. When you joined as chief judge in 1980, the security wasn't quite what it is today. The protection for federal judges may not have been as high as it is today in the the 2000s. But
and when I took the job there as commissioner, I never dreamed I'd be coming back 27 years later as chief judge.
Yeah, in 1953, and then later in 1980. We want to highlight a little bit about that time in 78, 79. We'll have to do that tomorrow. I guess Jim Taylor, if we can talk a little bit about Jim Taylor tomorrow. But of course, the excitement for you in 1950 as you were there, and we think about Ned Everett and other persons, spectacular students who were actually older than you your first year when you taught prior to joining the Air Force. It must have been an amazing experience.
It was. I was 22. Most of the students were veterans. I was not at that time. They had a few women students, unlike a lot of law schools. When I got out of Harvard in 1950, there were no women law students.
Is that right?
They changed the year I graduated. I don't know if they wanted me out of there before they admitted women or what, but be that as it may, That was one of the largest law schools. They still had not admitted women.
Wow.
Which to me seems so strange since my mother was
of course
a woman lawyer.
Graduated from law school in 1920. We've run out of time. Thanks so much for being with us. Will you come back tomorrow?
Absolutely.
Of course, as long as you can enjoy the great buffet here tomorrow as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much for being with us. Stay tuned to more of the Honorable Robinson Oscar Everett coming up next. We found out in part 1 and part 2 that his mother practiced law for 70 plus years. His father practiced law for 65 plus years. If you want to find out what Robinson Everett's ambitions are, you got to come back tomorrow for part 3 of the Honorable Robinson Oscar Everett. Be with us.